My name is, and 4 years ago, my world shattered in a doctor's office. I was 46, happily, or so I thought, married to David for over 20 years. We had a son, Max, who had just turned 18. David and I met in college. He was charming, dependable, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries and brought home flowers just because. Or so I believed. When I found a lump during a routine self-exam, I brushed it off as nothing. But something in my gut told me to check it out. I didn't expect the doctor's expression to change when he felt it. I didn't expect the words, stage 2 breast cancer. And I certainly didn't expect what would come next. I sat David and Max down that evening. I remember every detail. The trembling in my voice, the silence that followed my words, the way Max stared at the floor. David put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll get through this together." It sounded rehearsed, mechanical. I wanted to believe him. Over the next few weeks, life turned into a whirlwind of appointments, biopsies, scans, and decisions. My oncologist was straightforward. Surgery, followed by chemotherapy and radiation. It was going to be brutal, but I was prepared to fight. I had no choice. At first, David drove me to every appointment. Max kept his headphones in most of the time, barely speaking. I chalked it up to shock, maybe fear. I told myself, give them time. But time didn't heal. It revealed. 2 months into treatment, everything changed. David became distant. He'd sit on the opposite side of the room, glued to his phone. He stopped asking how I felt. Stopped touching me. One night, I overheard him on the phone whispering in the guest room. "It's just so hard, you know? She's not the same anymore. I didn't sign up for this." I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the nausea or the pain in my bones, but because of those words. I confronted him the next morning. His face went pale. He didn't deny it. "I can't do this anymore, Isabel," he said. This isn't a life." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I mean, I don't want to watch you waste away. I want to live. I've given you years of my life. I deserve happiness, too." It felt like a slap. No, worse, a betrayal deeper than any wound. 2 days later, he packed a bag. Max followed him without looking back. He didn't say goodbye, just slammed his bedroom door, dragged his suitcase down the hall, and left. I sat in my hospital gown on the edge of the bed, the chemo still pumping through my veins, and realized I was truly alone. No husband, no son, no support. Just silence. But what David didn't know, what they didn't know, was that I had spent the years before my diagnosis working tirelessly. My parents had passed away years ago, leaving me a small inheritance. I had invested wisely, run a modest but successful accounting business, and I owned the house outright. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, independent, and I was still alive. It would have been easier to give up, to let the sickness win. But that's not who I am. In the darkness of those lonely nights, as my hair fell out in clumps and my reflection became a stranger, I made myself a promise. If I survive this, I will come back stronger than ever. And I will never let anyone treat me like I'm disposable again. They thought they'd walked away from a dying woman. But the woman they left behind? She was just beginning her fight. And when they came back 4 years later, smiling, pretending to care, hungry for the fortune I'd built, they never saw it coming. Because this time, I was the one holding all the cards. The days after David and Max left blurred together. Mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there. The silence of the house felt like a second illness. Heavier than chemo, more suffocating than any bandage. I was fighting for my life, but it felt like I had already lost everything. For the first time in over 2 decades, I had to figure out how to navigate life on my own. And I was doing it while sick, bald, and too weak to climb the stairs without gasping for air. But something unexpected happened. People I barely knew started to step in. Mrs. Carter from next door began dropping off hot soup every other night. My old friend Alicia, who I hadn't seen in years, heard about my diagnosis and showed up with groceries and a stack of feel-good movies. A local church group offered to take me to appointments when I was too weak to drive. These were people with no obligations to me. No vows made, no blood ties. Yet they showed more care than the people who were supposed to love me the most. One afternoon, as I sat wrapped in a blanket on the front porch, sipping lukewarm tea, I got a call from the cancer center. They had assigned me a volunteer caregiver, a retired nurse named Eleanor. She was in her 60s, brisk but kind, with no patience for self-pity. She reminded me a little of my late mother. "I'm not here to feel sorry for you," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder during our first meeting. "I'm here to help you fight." And that's exactly what she did. Eleanor made sure I stuck to my medications, dragged me to every appointment, and pushed me, gently but firmly, to move, eat, and even laugh on days when all I wanted to do was curl into a ball and disappear. Slowly, the fog began to lift, but even as my body started responding to treatment, the emotional wounds still throbbed. I'd catch myself scrolling through old family photos, pausing on pictures of Max grinning at his high school graduation, David's arm slung proudly around him. We looked so happy. But were we? Or had I just been too busy being the glue that held everything together to notice how quickly they'd peel away when things got hard? One day, I received a letter in the mail. My stomach flipped when I saw the handwriting. It was Max. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't how are you, Mom? It was a brief note asking if I could co-sign on a private loan for a car he wanted. No, I miss you. No mention of my health. Just can you help me get what I want? I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I tore it in half. Then into quarters. Then I burned the pieces in the kitchen sink and watched the smoke curl into the air like an exorcism. That was the moment I stopped waiting. Stopped hoping for reconciliation. Stopped fantasizing about them showing up at my doorstep, remorseful and ready to make amends. They weren't coming back. Not for me. Maybe one day they'd show up for something from me. But never for me. With that truth came clarity. I turned the guest room into an office. I started freelancing again. Light work at first. Bookkeeping for small businesses, tax prep. It helped me feel human again. Useful. I didn't talk about David or Max with the clients I took on. I became just Isabel. Not Isabel, the woman who got abandoned by her husband and son. Eleanor encouraged me to document my journey, so I began journaling every night. My entries started as raw, tear-streaked confessions, but slowly turned into affirmations. One entry read, "They left, but I stayed. I stayed and fought." And that makes me powerful. By the 1-year mark, I was in remission. My hair had started growing back in soft silver wisps. I treated myself to a modest celebration. Just me, Eleanor, and Alicia. We laughed, cried, and toasted with sparkling cider. I was healing. Slowly, quietly, but deeply. Then came the call that would change everything. My great-uncle Harold had passed away. He was a reclusive man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, but we'd written letters now and then. He admired my independence, he once said. He never had children and had never remarried after his wife passed. To my complete shock, he had left his entire estate to me. Property, stocks, investments, an offshore account. After taxes and fees, $8 million. I sat in stunned silence when the lawyer gave me the figure. That kind of money could change your life, or someone else's. And I knew, deep in my bones, it would draw them back. David, Maximum, the people who once left me behind for dead. They'd come sniffing around again. But what they didn't know was I wasn't the same woman anymore. And the house they remembered? It no longer felt like home. But it would be the perfect stage for the surprise they never saw coming. It started with a knock on the door. Not the usual polite kind you'd expect from a neighbor or delivery driver. This one was loud, insistent. Like whoever was on the other side was entitled to be let in. I paused mid-step, coffee mug in hand. My heart pounded as I peered through the peephole. David and Max. I froze. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating. But no, there they were, standing on my porch like they had just returned from a weekend trip instead of disappearing from my life for 4 long years. I didn't open the door right away. I just watched them. David looked older, more tired. His once perfectly groomed beard was patchy, his tailored clothes replaced with something wrinkled and ill-fitting. Max, now in his early 20s, stood awkwardly behind him. He had grown taller, leaner, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't changed. That same discomfort when life got hard. That same unwillingness to face consequences. They waited a few moments. Then David knocked again, more firmly this time. "Isabel?" he called. "We just want to talk." I stood behind the door, unmoving. My grip tightened around my coffee mug. Why now? I thought. But I already knew the answer. $8 million. They must have heard about the inheritance. Maybe through a mutual acquaintance. Maybe they snooped. David had always been curious about my extended family, especially Harold. He once joked about how it must be nice to have a distant uncle with beachfront property. But it wasn't just about the money. Not entirely. There was guilt too. Or at least the desire to erase it. Not with an apology, of course, but with re-entry. To just walk back into my life like nothing had happened. To rewrite history with a few kind words and a warm smile. But I remembered. I remembered how David had looked at me like I was already gone. How Max had ghosted me like I was an inconvenience. I remembered crying in the bathroom after surgery, alone, wiping my own blood from the floor because no one was there to help. I opened the door a crack. David's face lit up. "Isabel." "Thank God." Max offered a half-hearted smile. "I'm surprised you're here," I said, voice steady. "I figured you were still too busy living your best life without me." David's smile faltered. "Can we come in?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "No," I said. "You can talk from here." There was a silence, a long, awkward one. David looked at Max, then cleared his throat. "I heard about Harold, and about the inheritance." "Of course you did." "And?" "I just thought maybe we could talk. Start fresh. Maybe reconnect." I let out a quiet laugh. "Reconnect? After 4 years of nothing?" Max finally spoke. We didn't know how to come back, Mom. It was hard. Hard. They always said it was hard. For them. As if watching me fight for my life was a burden on their shoulders. I looked at them both and finally said what had haunted me for years. You left because I wasn't useful to you anymore. Because I was sick, bald, and weak. You didn't want to see me like that. You wanted the version of me who cooked your dinners, cleaned your messes, and smiled through exhaustion. The version that held you together. David looked defensive. That's not fair. No, I interrupted. What wasn't fair was being left to die alone while the people I loved the most walked away. I could see it in David's eyes. He wasn't there for me back then because he didn't know how to be. He couldn't handle discomfort, couldn't deal with vulnerability. And Max? He was too young, too impressionable, too wrapped up in his father's passive example. And now? Now they were back because I had something they wanted. It's not just about the money, David added quickly, as if reading my thoughts. It's about family. Family? I whispered. You only remember family when it's convenient. There it was, that flash of guilt on Max's face. But I didn't soften. I couldn't. Look, David said, adjusting his tone. We made mistakes. I made mistakes, but we want to be part of your life again. I narrowed my eyes. Funny how that desire only showed up once there were millions on the table. He didn't deny it, and in that moment, I saw them for exactly what they were. People who loved the idea of me, not the reality. They didn't miss me. They missed the life they had with me. The safety, the comfort, the security. Now that I was thriving again, now that I was worth something in their eyes, they wanted back in. But they weren't walking through that door, not without consequences. I need time to think, I said, stepping back. And before David could protest, I added, whatever you're expecting to find here, it won't be what you think. Then I closed the door. And this time it felt like closing a chapter. One I would soon rewrite on my own terms. After I closed the door on David and Max, I stood there for a long time. My hand resting on the cool wood, my heart still hammering in my chest. Not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't. They had come back, and I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't folded into myself or second-guessed my worth. I had stood firm. It was a quiet kind of victory, but it echoed through every room in that house like thunder. Still, I knew that this was just the beginning. They weren't going to give up that easily. People like David rarely did, especially when money was involved. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized David's handwriting immediately. It was long, 3 pages, filled with carefully chosen words, sentimental phrases, and regret-laced apologies. The kind of letter that might have swayed the version of me that existed 4 years ago. The woman who still believed in second chances, who thought family bonds were unbreakable, no matter how badly they frayed. But not this version. Not the woman who had stitched herself back together, one chemo session and heartbreak at a time. The final paragraph was the real reason for the letter. I know things were difficult, but Max is in college now. He's studying finance. We've been living modestly, but the tuition is steep. If there's any way you could consider helping, just until he graduates, it would mean the world. There it was. The hook. They didn't come back to make amends. They came back for access. Access to my life, my home, my money, my forgiveness. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace thinking. That night, I called my lawyer. Isabel, he said, I was wondering when you'd be in touch. Let's talk estate planning, I replied, and let's make it airtight. Over the next week, I updated everything. My will, my power of attorney, my medical directives. I transferred the deed to the house into a living trust, with very specific stipulations. I named my beneficiaries, none of which included David or Max. Instead, I added Alicia, Eleanor, the local cancer foundation, and a few neighbors who had become like family during the hardest time of my life. But I didn't stop there. I had another idea, a more personal one. I started making changes to the house. The guest room, which had once been a cold, unused space, I transformed into a studio, complete with a recording setup, a filing cabinet, and a secured lockbox. I began filming video journals. Each entry was labeled with a date, and in each, I spoke directly to the camera. I talked about my journey, my cancer, the abandonment, the people who helped me, and the people who didn't. I want this to be clear, I said into the lens one evening, in case anyone ever tries to twist the story later. David and Max left. They left when I needed them the most. And now that I've recovered and inherited millions, they've returned. But not out of love, out of convenience. I saved everything to both a physical hard drive and the cloud. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared, because I knew the next time they showed up, it wouldn't be to talk. It would be to claim. A week passed in silence. Then another. I started to relax. Maybe the message had gotten through. Maybe they were too embarrassed to try again. Then, one Saturday morning, I went outside to check the mailbox and saw a black car idling down the street. Windows tinted, engine running, watching. I stood there for a moment, holding my mail in one hand, my body frozen. It wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. I went back inside, locked the door, and made another call. This time to a security company. Within 3 days, the house was equipped with cameras, alarms, and motion detectors. The front porch, the driveway, the backyard, everything. I also had the locks changed. When you survive cancer, you learn not to leave anything to chance. That night, I sat with Eleanor and told her everything. She didn't say much, but she reached out and held my hand. "They'll come back," she said softly. "And when they do, you'll be ready." I nodded. I want them to see what strength looks like. I want them to understand exactly what they walked away from. Then, almost as an afterthought, I added, "And when the time is right, I want to show them what I've become." Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything they tried to strip from me. My dignity, my voice, my power. And when they came knocking again, they'd find a woman who wasn't broken, desperate, or vulnerable. They'd find a woman who had already written the ending to her story, and they weren't part of it. The knock came again, 2 weeks later. Not the aggressive pounding I'd expected. This time it was softer, almost hesitant. I saw them before I opened the door. David and Max, standing in the exact same spot as before, but their posture was different. David looked irritated, like he was being inconvenienced. Max stood behind him, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, eyes downcast. I opened the door halfway and stepped outside, not saying anything. David was the first to speak. "You've been ignoring our messages." "I have," I said, because I had nothing to say. David sighed, glancing at Max. "Isabel, this is ridiculous. We were married for 20 years. Don't you think we deserve at least a conversation?" I raised an eyebrow. "Now you want to talk about what we deserve?" Max stepped forward. "Mom, can I say something?" I turned to him slowly. This was the first time he'd called me Mom since the day they walked out. "I know you're angry," he said. "You have every right to be. I didn't understand back then. I was selfish and I was scared. I just followed Dad because it was easier. I thought I'd come back someday. I told myself it wasn't forever." His voice cracked slightly, and he looked up at me. But then days became weeks. Weeks became years, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to face you. I didn't know how to make it right. His words landed like a weight on my chest, because I had waited for this. Not the polished lies David sent in letters, but real, honest regret. From the one person I never stopped hoping would come around. I softened slightly, but I didn't move. David, however, looked annoyed. "We didn't come here to grovel, Isabel. You need to stop punishing us for something that's already in the past. You're healthy now. You've moved on. So why are you still holding on to this bitterness?" I stared at him. "Bitterness?" He shrugged. "You're acting like we abandoned you to die. But you didn't die. You're doing great. So what's the point of staying angry?" Something inside me snapped. I didn't die, David, because I fought for my life alone. I cooked for myself while vomiting. I changed my own bandages. I drove myself to radiation when I could barely sit up. I went to sleep every night wondering if I'd wake up. And while I was battling cancer, you were off finding comfort with someone else, and our son didn't even send me a card. David stepped back slightly, his mouth opening, but no words came out. Max looked stricken. "Wait, you were alone? The whole time?" I nodded. "Your father left. You followed. No calls, no texts. I fought cancer with strangers and neighbors, people who owed me nothing." Max's eyes began to water. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I thought you had help. I thought maybe you didn't want to see us." "No, Max," I said, gentler now. "I wanted my family. I wanted the people I raised to show me that I mattered." There was a silence between us, one heavy with the weight of years lost. Then David broke it. "Listen, we're not here to rehash everything. Let's just talk about what matters now." "Let me guess," I said coldly. "Harold's inheritance." He didn't deny it. "I heard about the trust, about the house, about the money. Max could use some help. I could use some too. We're not asking for everything, just a portion. You're sitting on millions, Isabel. And you're sitting on the memory of abandoning your sick wife?" I snapped. I took a deep breath. "This house, this life, it's mine. Every inch of it was rebuilt by me. Not you, not him." I pointed to the porch camera. "You see that? You're being recorded. Everything we say, everything we do, saved. If you show up again uninvited, I'll file for a restraining order. You walked away once. I suggest you do it again." David clenched his jaw. "So you're just going to let your own son struggle while you sit here in luxury?" Max shook his head. "Dad, stop." We both looked at him. "I don't want her money," Max said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." David scoffed. You can't be serious. Max turned to him, jaw tight. You left her. I followed you. But it was a mistake, and I've carried it with me every day since. Then he turned to me. I don't expect you to forgive me today. Maybe not ever. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not because of the money, not because of what you can give me, just because I hurt you, and I hate myself for that. My throat tightened. He stepped back, eyes shimmering. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. David looked stunned as Max walked away, down the steps and into the street. I didn't follow. I didn't call after him. But a part of me, a guarded, weathered part, cracked open just slightly. Because maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't done yet. And as for David? He wasn't finished trying. But he had no idea what was waiting for him next. It happened 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea and Eleanor by my side, watching the sun dip low over the trees, when the same black car from before rolled slowly down the street and stopped at the curb. David stepped out. Alone this time. He was dressed better than before. Probably his attempt to look respectable, maybe even regretful. But his eyes gave him away. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here for what he thought was rightfully his. I stood, calm and composed. Eleanor didn't move, but her presence gave me strength, like a silent reminder. You don't owe him anything. David approached the porch with a practiced smile. I figured we should talk, just the two of us. I don't think there's anything left to say, I replied. He nodded, still playing the part. Look, I know I messed up. I was scared. I wasn't strong enough, but I'm here now. And maybe we can find a way to move forward. I tilted my head. Move forward to what, exactly? To peace, closure, maybe even reconciliation, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the house. You've done well for yourself. I'm proud of you. That line, that little dig disguised as praise, made me smile. Are you proud of me because I survived cancer? I asked. Or because I inherited $8 million? His smile faltered. I'm not here for the money. Then what are you here for? He hesitated. Max, I want a future for him. He's trying hard. He's in school. He has potential. And I don't, I said, letting the words hang. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He moved to sit on the porch step, but I stepped in front of him. Number you stand. David looked up at me, annoyed now. What's this? Some performance? No, I said. This is the finale. He frowned. What? I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a copy of the trust paperwork and a letter addressed to him. I handed it to him slowly. This is your homecoming surprise. He opened it, eyes scanning the document, his brows furrowed. What is this? It's the legal transfer of this house, I said. It no longer belongs to me. He looked up sharply. What? I donated the house to a local nonprofit that supports women recovering from major illness. In a month, this place will become transitional housing for female cancer survivors who have nowhere to go after treatment. He looked stunned. You gave it away? I nodded. I don't need it anymore. I've bought a small cottage in the mountains. Quiet, peaceful, just the right size for one. He shook his head. You're joking. I'm not. But this was our house. No, David. This was my house. I paid for it. I maintained it. I survived in it. You left it. And me when I needed you the most. You don't get to come back years later and act like this is still yours. His hands trembled as he held the paper. You're throwing it all away? I'm giving it to someone who needs it. And as for the rest of Harold's estate, I pulled out a second envelope. Donated to cancer research, hospice support, and women's shelters. Every last cent. His face turned red. You had millions, Isabel. I had everything I needed the day I realized I didn't need you anymore. He dropped the envelopes on the porch. You're cruel. Number I'm free. Just then, the porch light flicked on behind me. It was Eleanor holding my coat. It's time, she said gently. David didn't move. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he never really knew me. I turned and walked inside, closing the door behind me without another word. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a moment, confused, defeated. Then he bent to pick up the envelopes, stuffed them into his coat, and walked back to his car. As the engine roared to life and the car rolled down the street, I exhaled deeply. Not in relief, in release. Later that night, I got a text from Max. I heard what you did with the house. It's incredible, Mom. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday I earn a second chance. I really am sorry. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I saved it. Because unlike David, Max had changed. He saw what mattered now. And maybe one day we could talk again. Not as mother and son trying to fix the past, but as two people who had learned from it. In the end, I lost my husband. I lost my son. For a while. I lost my health, but I found myself.